Top Thrill Dragster was the Intamin hydraulic launch coaster at Cedar Point. This originally opened as the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster, but after a tragic accident in 2021, the ride closed forever. It reopened in 2024 as Top Thrill 2, but the new version is quite different. This video will be a detailed review of the original experience, Top Thrill Dragster. If you are interested in Top Thrill 2 specifically, this review will touch on that ride briefly, mostly to compare it to the original, but there will be a separate review dedicated to that ride. If you're watching this in the future and already saw that review, the next part will be a bit repetitive. The original Dragster's history is integral to the Top Thrill 2's history. If you want to skip this, go to the time shown on screen. Cedar Point loves records. They particularly love the height and speed records, but there were some asterisks next to their records. Gemini opened in 1978. The park claimed it was the tallest and fastest coaster out there. While Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg was slightly taller, and Screamin' Eagle at Six Flags St. Louis was slightly faster, Gemini did have the largest drop of the three. Magnum XL 200 opened in 1989 as the tallest and fastest full-circuit roller coaster. It broke the 200-foot height barrier, so it is often called the first hypercoaster. However, Moonsault Scramble at Fuji-Q Highland was an even taller ride, but this was a shuttle coaster, so Cedar Point did not count it. Millennium Force opened in 2000 once again as the tallest and fastest full-circuit roller coaster. It broke the 300-foot height barrier, so it is often called the first Giga Coaster. However, there once again were two taller and faster shuttle coasters already out there, Tower of Terror at Dreamworld and Superman at Six Flags Magic Mountain. The latter stood 415 feet, or 126 meters tall. In 2003, Cedar Point built something that would unquestionably take sole ownership of the height and speed records. This is the subject of this video, Top Thrill Dragster. Planning for this coaster started shortly after Millennium Force opened. The park contacted Intamin, who had built both Millennium Force and Superman. They brainstormed a massive launch coaster using a newer propulsion method. After the 2021 season, the park relocated one of their Dodgem rides to Michigan's Adventure. In early 2002, Intamin laid some giant concrete footers for the top hat, and Cedar Point hid them behind a fence. Enthusiasts thought nothing of Intamin being on site at the time because they were in the process of constructing Wicked Twister, an impulse coaster. Meanwhile, across the country, Cedar Fair and Intamin opened Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. This was the prototype hydraulic launch coaster. During normal operation, this coaster would accelerate riders from 0 to 82 miles per hour or 132 kilometers per hour in just 2.3 seconds. However, while the ride was closed, Intamin tested launches of 112 miles per hour and 117 miles per hour. Footage of this is exceedingly rare, but there's a great video of this on Midway Mayhem's channel. This proved the hydraulic launch could accelerate a train fast enough to break the height and speed records. With this proven, track appeared on site and vertical construction began. It was not until early 2023 when the ride's stats were officially announced. This was deliberately done so another park would not swoop in and beat them to the records. And their fears were warranted, especially since Six Flags Great Adventure opened Kingda Ka in 2005. This was a near clone of Dragster that was just a little bit taller and faster. Top Thrill Dragster would feature a 120 mile per hour or 190 km per hour launch and a 420 foot or 130 meter tall top hat. This made it the first Strata coaster, or coaster to exceed the 400 foot mark. While Superman's structure exceeded this mark as well, the train never actually reached this height. I only count something as a hyper, giga, or strata if the train reaches that height or as a drop of that height. Top Thrill Dragster opened in 2003, but it operated very sporadically that year. It was closed more often than it was open. Interestingly, Cedar Point and Intamin played around with the trains quite a bit. It was always supposed to have a 5-car train, but it opened with just 4 cars to save some weight. The original configuration sat just 12 riders. The middle cars had 2 rows of 2. Then the front and back cars accommodated just 2 riders each. The latter also had large decorative tires, a fake engine, and a fin. By the ride's second operating season, it was using the 5-car train as intended. However, the decorations on the back car were removed. This was another wage-saving strategy, but the park added 2 extra seats there, which is a fair trade in my opinion. We have seen many rides open with poor reliability and improve with time. Top Thrill Dragster was always a problem child. It was one of the most mechanically complex coasters in the world. The hydraulic launch had a lot of moving parts between the catch car and cable. The latter snapped at least once with guests on board. Then the launch track was lined with a series of retractable brakes in case the train were to roll back. There were hundreds of sensors involved with this, and if any of them tripped, the ride would fault. Along with the mechanical issues, this ride also hated Mother Nature. It was extremely sensitive to wind. This would cause the ride to roll back as well. If you felt any significant breeze at ground level, think 15 miles per hour or more, this coaster would usually close. That is because it would be even windier atop the tower where a wind meter was located. I have seen some sources say the official closing speed was if the meter read 30 to 35 miles per hour. Then the coaster would not operate in any rain. This was for the comfort of guests. This is how most of the Accelerator coasters are operated, so it wasn't specific to Top Thrill Dragster. But Dragster's biggest issue occurred in 2021. A guest waiting in line was seriously injured by a flag plate that dislodged from the train. The investigation did not find Cedar Point at fault, but the ride never reopened. It is possible that Cedar Point was already looking to close Dragster due to its frequent downtime and high operating costs. But this accident was the straw that broke the camel's back. In 2022, the park officially announced that Top Thrill Dragster, as we knew it, was being retired. They said the coaster would return as a new and reimagined experience. People immediately theorized a hydraulic launch would be replaced with an LSM launch. LSMs are the preferred propulsion method for most manufacturers now. Compared to hydraulic launches, they are way more reliable as they have no moving parts, and they are more cost-effective as well. Red Force of Ferrariland in Spain has a similar layout to Top Thrill Dragster, and it uses this method to launch trains to 112 miles per hour or 180 kilometers per hour and up a 367 foot or 112 meter tall top hat. However, that ride's trains are 2 cars shorter, and it featured a longer launch track, so it was not possible to do a 1-for-1 swap of Dragster's old launch without further modifying the ride. Fortunately, multiple manufacturers, including Intamin, had developed swing launches. This multi-pass launch allowed rides to achieve greater speeds in shorter distances, and they were typically accommodated by a crowd-pleasing spike offering oodles of weightlessness. Given their history with record-breaking coasters, swing launch coasters, and the original Dragster, people assumed Intamin would be behind the renovation. However, El Toro Ryan shared that Zamperla would be behind the conversion. This seemed unbelievable, as the Italian manufacturer had not even built a coaster 1/3 of Dragster's height. But they indeed were the manufacturer that was selected. I have heard that Intamin submitted a bid, but the rumor is that their proposal would have either required the removal of Iron Dragon or a shorter 200-foot spike. Zamperla proposed a 420-foot spike that could work around Iron Dragon. I also suspect they may have been cheaper, as they wanted a chance to showcase their recently improved coaster division. What better way to announce to the world you're a major player in the coaster industry than to have a signature roller coaster at America's Roller Coast? This conversion was a pretty rare event. We have seen wood coasters turned into hybrid coasters, but it's exceedingly rare to see a steel coaster converted into something else by any manufacturer, especially an entirely different manufacturer. The most notable cases I can think of are Steel Phantom in A Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood, and Buzzsaw Falls in a Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City. Top Thrill 2 opened in 2024, but it had a terrible inaugural season, operating for just 1 week before it closed down. Zamperla's prototype Lightning trains developed an issue that took a year to resolve. I indirectly think this closure may have contributed to Kingda Ka's demise. That coaster closed down permanently a few months after Top Thrill 2's disastrous debut. I suspect the newly merged Six Flags chain may have wanted to do a similar conversion to Kingda Ka to reduce its operating costs. But after the issues with Top Thrill 2, They instead chose to scrap the ride and build an entirely different record-breaking coaster in its place. Top Thrill 2 reopened in 2025. It had a much publicized and ill-timed closure during Coaster Mania weekend due to an issue with the spike, but otherwise has operated fairly reliably. Hopefully that continues going forwards. But for the rest of this review, I want to go back to the original Top Thrill Dragster. I always loved this coaster's presentation. It had an absolute presence. The top hat was a structural marvel due to its sheer size. You could see the coaster from almost anywhere in the park, especially considering its centralized location. Then the launch was a spectacle. It had eye-popping speeds, and it sounded like a jet engine. This was such a sight that the park constructed a set of bleachers to showcase this element, and they were usually filled. This also fit the ride's drag racing theme. Beyond the bleachers, there were also racing lights. These were both at ground level adjacent to the launch and on the tower itself. I also liked how the track looked, as it had a different paint scheme than the park's other coasters. It was mostly red, but the launch area had alternating white pieces. Then the train nose pieces were long and slender to resemble a dragster. And this coaster would also play Republica's Ready to Go in the station. This is an energetic song that would get people pumped up for their rides. I can't hear that song without thinking about Dragster. As I noted earlier, Dragster operated very sporadically due to mechanical and weather issues. So if you saw it operating, it was pretty wise to head over there before it broke down. While some of the mechanical issues would be resolved in 15 to 20 minutes, it was not guaranteed. I found the weather closures to be the most frustrating to deal with. Conditions could change rapidly due to this park's location on a peninsula. Along with the downtime, Top Thrill Dragster routinely had long waits. That's why it was nerve-wracking waiting in a long queue for this ride. I always assumed it would break down at some point, and more often than not, it seemed to break down when I was queuing for it. On the bright side, you could at least keep your phone with you while queuing for Dragster. Compare that to Top Thrill 2 where you cannot bring anything with you into the queue. Everything must go in lockers there. Worse, Top Thrill 2's queue is closed in due to the accident on Dragster, so it is absolutely boring. Meanwhile, Dragster's queue was way more open, so anticipation would build as you saw the coaster zipping around you. I commonly saw Dragsters wait around the 45 to 60 minute mark. This was not the fault of the crew, as it load and dispatch trains at a nice clip, especially with the dual load and dual unload platforms. It was more about the ride's popularity and the throughput. The ride would usually run 5 trains, so it could pump through guests at a good clip. The issue was the downtime. The repeated closures would cause people to flood this ride when it was available. Everyone knew it could close at any given moment, raising urgency to get on as quickly as possible. The safest way to ride Top Thrill Dragster was to use Fastlane. That way, you could board as quickly as possible when it was open. You'd merge directly into the station, so as long as you didn't wait extra for the front row, you could often board in less than 5 minutes. I always would wait extra for the front though, if allowed. This usually took a few extra cycles, but it was well worth it. Feeling the full force of that launch was breathtaking. Usually, the attendant would honor row requests, but there were times that forced you to take an empty seat, particularly during quieter periods to ensure a near full train was dispatched. Many guests liked to hit this ride first, but I was not a fan of this approach. It typically was not available for early entry, yet people would wait by the ride hoping it would open with the park. I tried this approach once, but the ride did not open on time. Ever since, I have always preferred to take a guaranteed ride on something that is actually open in the morning. Now there was one closure at Top Thrill Dragster that I genuinely enjoyed. Way back in 2018, the park had season pass holder ERTs scheduled in this ride at night. However, it broke. Surprise, surprise. So Cedar Point offered Millennium Force as an alternative, which I was 100% on board with. While I liked Dragster, I definitely preferred Millennium. The trains had the old school Intamin T-bar restraints. These were similar to the ones on Millennium Force or Accelerator. I love these trains. They are shockingly open, which is surreal on a coaster this intense. I think these are far superior to the later Accelerator coasters like King Ka that would feature over-the-shoulder restraints. There was one con with these restraints though. They were extremely unaccommodating. Larger guests would struggle to secure the seatbelts and get the lap bars down far enough. The over-the-shoulder restraints Intamin later used could accept a wider range of guests. Once checked, 2 trains would roll out of the station. One of the best aspects about Dragster was the anticipation. It was impossible not to feel your heartbeat as you saw that massive top hat in front of you. I thought it was even more suspenseful if you were the second train dispatched from the back of the station, since you'd see the prior train take off like a bullet mere feet in front of you. Your train would pause on the launch track. The catch car would engage the train. After a few seconds, you would roll slightly back. The brake fins would then lower. Just a second or two later, the racing lights would go from yellow to green. Once you got the green light, you'd hear the sound of burning rubber and take off. This launch was epic. It accelerated you to a reported speed of 120 miles per hour or 193 kilometers per hour in just 4 seconds. While the ride's actual speed was commonly under that, it was still really freaking fast. That raw power was matched by very few launches. It would pin you against your seat back. If you've only experienced magnetic launches, hydraulic launches are way more violent. Of all the hydraulic launches out there, a few like Accelerator had a stronger initial yank than Dragster, but Dragster still had one of the strongest initial yanks, plus speed strong enough to force your cheeks backwards if you sat up front. The wind would power blast your face. This moment felt completely out of control. King Dakaa's launch was statistically comparable to Dragster's, but I thought that ride had a bit more oomph to it. Whereas Dragster's launch was rapid, the acceleration curve felt fluid. Kaa's acceleration meanwhile felt pulsed, as you'd feel these distinct yanks as you were ripped down the track. After Dragster's launch, you would pull up into the top hat. This offered brief, but very strong positive Gs. You would twist 90 degrees as you rocketed towards the sky. You'd bleed off so much speed by the apex that it always felt like you'd roll back. Now that could happen on occasion, much to the chagrin of roller coaster enthusiasts, but I never experienced one. It sounded amazing falling backwards 40 stories, and you get to experience the launch again, so it was an absolute win. Even stranger than a rollback, occasionally you would get stuck perfectly at the top. Most times, you'd clear the top hat, and as you went over it, you'd get a brief but spectacular view at the top. It was awe-inspiring staring down Millennium Force and looking out towards Lake Erie. This also would offer solid floater airtime over the top. I particularly liked this moment in back. You'd start floating before you reached the peak, then you would float a little more for the start of the drop. If you've ridden Top Thrill 2, you know the airtime over the top hat is far more extreme. That ride offers genuine ejector. It is particularly crazy in the rear row because it's maintained for the entire drop. On Dragster, you would quickly return to your seat, as the drop was not about airtime. Rather, it was all about laterals. The vertical drop featured a 270-degree twist. This was quick and would fling your body sideways. It was one of the best lateral moments out there. Yet Top Thrill 2 beat it. Since the trains have a higher center of gravity, the laterals are even wilder, especially in the rear row because you're getting amazing ejector airtime simultaneously. Dragster's pullout would then blast riders with heavy positive Gs. You would once again feel the wind smacking against your face as you had an extended straightaway underneath the finish line. You'd then hit the brakes and smoothly decelerate. The train would then park in the unload platform, ending the 2,800 foot or 850 meter long experience. While that track length looks fine on paper, this was a ridiculously short ride. Due to the high speeds, launch to brakes took less than 20 seconds, but the ride was an absolute rush during that time. Top Thrill 2 offers nearly 3 times as much prime ride time due to its multi-pass launch, but it comes at the expense of pacing. That ride takes a bit longer to get going. In terms of smoothness, Dragster did a great job. The train would have a slight shimmy on the launch and the pullouts, which is fair given the speeds. I did not find it to be a nuisance at all because it was relatively minor, and it did not cause any discomfort. This shake was similar all across the train. Overall, the ride was quite smooth in my opinion. King Dakaa felt similar up front, but the rear row in that ride shook far more than Dragster. I think Top Thrill 2 shakes somewhere in between. Still plenty tolerable and comfortable overall though, but definitely more noticeable than the original Dragster. So what would I rate Top Thrill Dragster? I would give this coaster an 8.5 out of 10. This was a pure adrenaline rush. You had one of the best launches ever devised, and this made the ride for me. Then this was followed by a top hat with stellar views, some airtime, and wicked laterals coming down. I personally prefer coasters with longer, more complete layouts, but this was still an epic experience, even if it did feel like a somewhat incomplete coaster due to its short length. Now for the 3 questions I know people want to know. Did I prefer King to Ka or Top Thrill Dragster? I preferred Dragster by a hair. Ka had the slightly better launch, but I preferred Dragster for the superior restraints and views. Do I prefer Top Thrill Dragster or Top Thrill 2? That too is close, but I prefer Dragster because of the old launch. It was one of the best elements out there. Top Thrill 2 beats Dragster in most other areas, but the launches just did not have the same out-of-control feeling. Do I think Cedar Point made the right decision turning Dragster into Top Thrill 2? Yes, I do. While Top Thrill 2 had a rocky initial season, the ride should be more reliable and cost-effective in the long run, and I really think the park had to do something drastic after the negative publicity from 2021's incident. Those are my thoughts on the original Top Thrill Dragster at Cedar Point. Check back in a day or two for a Top Thrill 2 review, or if you're watching this later, go check that out now. What are your thoughts on the original Dragster? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this review, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you consider subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.